Hello everyone and welcome back to the Champions Showdown with a very important game for the tournament and for both Magnus and Wesley, because here we have a battle of two world champions. Magnus, who is a world champion in every time format, he's a world champion in Classical, in Rapid and in Blitz, but he is not the world champion in Chess960, because last year we've had the first ever official Chess960 World Chess Championship and Wesley was victorious. He defeated Magnus Carlsen. Well, not just defeated, he completely obliterated him. Out of the 6 games they played, Wesley won 4 games and 2 of the games were drawn. So Magnus was without a single win. So very important game for the standings, and of course for Magnus, who would definitely enjoy having at least one victory against Wesley in Chess960. So without further ado, let's check it out, as it is quite the game. So here we have another very interesting setup. 2 bishops here, 2 knights here. So already the bishop pair from hell on both sides will be fully operational very quickly from the beginning. So of course g3, you have to open up those bishops. We have knight to c6 by Wesley, and now c4. Fighting for the d5 square. We have f5 by Wesley, now preparing g6, so both of the bishops will be fully operational. We have d3 by Magnus, and now g6. Magnus likes to play these setups where he will play e4, gain control of the d5 square, but he will have the backwards d3 pawn, something he enjoys even in regular chess. So knight to c3, and here e5. Wesley fully develops his king side. We have bishop captures on c6 by Magnus. Now this is a very interesting decision very early on, giving up the bishop pair to mess up black's pawn structure. And even though it's kind of principled to capture towards the center, here Wesley does have plans of castling queenside, so he captures with the d pawn instead. We have e4 by Magnus, now with control of the d5 square, but on the other hand he leaves the d3 pawn kind of weak here, and here we have castles by both sides, so castles queenside and castles queenside. I will mention it one more time, as I'm sure there are new people coming aboard with every video. In Chess960, when you castle, so it's only important that you clear those squares that the king and rook need in regular chess. What I mean by this is that nothing can be in between king and the rook, and once you perform a castles, which is moving your king 2 squares to the left, then they will occupy the exact same positions they would if you've castled queenside in regular chess. That's how castling in Chess960 works. We have knight to b6 by Wesley. Continuing development, and now f3, strengthening the center, and also if captures, you can capture with the f-pawn, and then also a queen trade might be possible. Knight to d7, Wesley prepares to shift the knight over to f6, and knight to b3, getting the other knight into the game. We have b6, now with ideas of c5 in the future to gain full control of the d4 square, and bishop to e3 by Magnus. And here Wesley goes for a very interesting idea, f4. Now, it's an interesting idea because if Magnus should trade here, captures, and let's say bishop moves back, then after c5, this pawn is incredibly weak, and it's going to be very hard for white to do anything here. And opening up the position in this case doesn't really work all that great for white, because it's Wesley with the bishop pair from hell, not Magnus, and it's going to be very hard to defend this. So instead, Magnus just goes back. After f4, we have bishop back to d2, and now g5, strengthening that f4 pawn. We have knight to e2, and now bishop to f6. Magnus makes room for the bishop to come to c3 to counter this bishop, so Wesley goes bishop to f6, maybe with ideas of doubling up on this diagonal with the queen and having more pressure alongside this diagonal. Bishop to c3 by Magnus, and now a5, with ideas of a4, kicking away this knight, which means that you would gain even more control of the d4 square. And in the future, maybe a3 is possible to somehow bust open Carlsen's queen side. So a nice prophylactic king to b1 and king to b7. Wesley also improves the position of the king. He says there's time to play a4, I can first play king to b7, and if Magnus plays a4 himself to prevent black from playing a4, then he just messed up his position even further on the queen side, which will be good for me. So here Magnus goes a3 instead, and now comes rook to e7. Now this is a very interesting move. Wesley wants to double up, probably here after the knight moves, but it's strange that he didn't go rook to e6 right away with the idea of doubling up here. which we'll see later. And also here he allows Magnus a very sneaky idea of bishop captures on a5, but Magnus didn't go for this because you don't really have to capture the bishop. I mean, if you capture the bishop, then it is good for white, of course. Knight captures on a5 with check. You're also going to pick up this pawn, and now it's weird that the rook is on e7, because after the king moves, if you go here, then captures, and it's a question whether the king can go to b6. But it's a lot to calculate, and Magnus doesn't feel like doing this, so instead, queen f2 first. Now, such ideas might be possible because he takes away the b6 square from the king. So now capturing here definitely is an idea. But now Wesley, of course, advances the pawn to a4. So a4, pushing the knight back, and knight b to c1 now. And rook to e6. So this is what I meant by this. Why not rook to e6 right away with the idea of doubling up here, but rather rook to e7 to e6 and only then here. But Wesley is the official world... the official Chess960 official random world chess champion, so who are we to question his rook plans? So g captures on f4. Magnus wants to execute d4 because if he doesn't, once the rook comes to this d6 square, it's gonna be stuck here for the rest of the game. So here he trades once, captures, and now d4. And now if this breakthrough works, then it's great. If it doesn't, then it's very bad. So Wesley captures, e captures on d4, we have captures, and now not capturing right away, but the rook to d6. He puts more pressure on the bishop here. Magnus trades on f6, we have captures, and now rook captures on d6. And with this capture, he fixes Wesley's pawn structure, and now we have this position where both players have 3 pawn islands, the material on the board is equal, but Wesley's position is a bit more safe, as you'll see, and it's incredibly difficult. Well, not just incredibly difficult, it's impossible to defend the c4 pawn. So by doing this breakthrough, Magnus pretty much blundered a pawn, as you cannot defend this. For example, if you go knight d3 to go for a double attack on this pawn, then just bishop captures. And if you go for knight d captures on f4 now, then it's a problem. Rook f8, and now white will not be able to move. You can always just capture here to pick up this pawn, so you'll not be able to retain that pawn. So after the c captures on d6 move, we have knight to c3. Magnus says, okay, you capture on c4, I'm just going to capture on a4, and then it's all good. But Wesley, not in a rush, he goes rook to a8. He defends his a4 pawn and says, okay, I'm just going to capture on the next move. And Magnus goes queen to c2. Queen to e2 with the idea of defending this just runs into knight to e5. And again, there's a double attack on the c4 pawn. You cannot defend this. There's no piece that can defend the c4 pawn. So instead, Magnus goes for queen to c2. He says, okay, there's a double attack on your a4 pawn. Maybe we can do something about it this way. But Wesley says, okay, but I'm not in a rush. Knight to e5. Again, with a double attack on the c4 pawn, and now also attacking the f3 pawn. And here, again, if you go queen to d1 to try and defend this pawn, then just captures on c4. And now the problem is, if you capture on a4, Wesley had rook captures on a4 in mind, and you've just won a piece. Because if Carlsen recaptures, you blunder mate on b2. So this would be checkmate. So after knight to e5, Magnus goes for knight captures on a4. But now Wesley has a couple of good choices. You could capture on f3, which is incredibly strong, opens up, well, just removes the f pawn, so you get a very strong passed f pawn. You also comes with an attack on the rook, but Wesley has a different idea. Knight captures on c4 instead. And now there's this constant pressure of queen to b2. So rook captures on a4 is a threat. But Magnus finds a very tricky idea of how to prevent this checkmate. He plays rook to g1. And now his idea is, also, we're going to explain the idea behind rook to g1. But Wesley had a very interesting idea if Magnus just goes back with the knight. If knight to c3, then the rook captures on a3, and it's pretty wild. If pawn captures, then knight captures here with check, wins Carlsen's queen. And if you don't capture it, well, then it's just a very difficult position to play for white. There's the forced e5 move, which allows counterplay for white, but it's hard to say if this is actual counterplay. For example, d captures here, and then you can go queen d3 with an attack on the knight, and also have some checking ideas. So it would be pretty crazy, but you don't have to capture it. You could just move the queen e7, and then the game continues with black just being better. So this is what Wesley had in mind if Magnus just went back with knight to c3. But Magnus found rook to g1, which is incredibly interesting, but also loses the game. So feel free to pause the video while I give you a couple of seconds and find. There are 2 winning moves for Wesley, so have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting either bishop to f7 or queen to d4. Wesley played queen to d4, but bishop to f7 is just a beautiful move, because basically what Carlsen is saying, he's saying that, okay, if you capture this, I no longer have to capture this and blunder mate, I can just capture the bishop on g8. So the whole point behind this brilliant bishop to f7 move is that you keep this threat, and Carlsen's rook to g1 move is now without a purpose. So here you would have to go back, because there's no defense against rook captures on a4. You'd have to go back, and now you allow rook captures on a3, and we go into that winning position for black. But Wesley played a different idea. After this rook to g1, Wesley played queen to d4, and now there's a double attack on the rook, and also threatening nasty discoveries like this knight will deliver check, and there's a double attack on the knight here. So incredibly difficult to defend, and when I say incredibly difficult, I mean impossible. But Magnus again finds a way. Here Magnus plays rook to d1. You cannot move the rook anywhere else. Like if you go here, just knight e3 with a double attack. Like for example, if just this with an attack on the rook, on the queen, and the double attack on this knight, this is completely lost for white. And you can't really move it anywhere along this g file because just well, rook captures here is the threat. And here Magnus finds rook to d1, and now Wesley moves the queen back. So queen goes to e5, and now Magnus just repeats rook to g1. He says, okay, we still keep this if captures then captures, but now Wesley played bishop to f7. There was also a very nice idea of just queen b5, and now you lose the piece. There's nothing you can do about this. Queen captures is happening because if you move the knight, then it's just knight captures on a3 check, and you lose the queen as there's a pin here. So after rook g1, Wesley plays bishop to f7 only now, and here, while there's not much for white to do, you have to go to this knight to c3 idea, followed by rook captures on a3, and the game continues with Wesley being completely winning. Magnus instead just played queen to c3, offered the queen trade, and at the same time he resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. He just blundered a knight here, and it's not like in Kasparov's case where he left a piece hanging. Here Magnus actually did play this, so of course he immediately resigned, even without Wesley playing rook captures on a4. But yeah, really great game. So Magnus still without a win against Wesley, and it seems like Wesley is an incredibly strong player in all time forums, but in Chess960 he's particularly talented and strong. So we'll see if he will be able to win this tournament as well. We're not going to mention the standings just yet, as there is one more game I want to show from yesterday. From our current leader. I'm not going to mention who it is, but then we're going to show the standings and discuss everything a bit more. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it and that it improved your Sunday at least a little bit. I would like to thank Tyler Hummel, Adam Gripo, Tobias Hensel, Kim Farnik, and Vashishta Sriram for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Champions Showdown, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday. And here's a nice photo of the 2 of them by Leonard Otis from last year's event, where Carlsen congratulates Wesley on his incredible victory in the match. See you soon.